Let's talk about acronyms first. And I kind of gave the example uh, on the other student's paper. Let me just find that. Oops. Okay. So, and you can look at this, you know, yourself as well. Um, I didn't share uh, an illustration of a model, but I did share her handout that describes basically her model. And so the acronym is kind of the name of her model, but the name creates a word that has some meaning. So, for instance, like she was treating PTSD and uh, she came up with commit to action, acceptance, and living in the moment. And that's because she uses mindfulness and lots of other more contemporary things. But, you know, when you just use the first letters of that word, those words, it comes up with calm, you know? So it's the calm model. So it sounds inviting. It's kind of, uh, what what you'd like to see in a model for anxiety or PTSD or trauma or something like that. So what I'd like you to think about for next week is you've got the title of your paper, you know, um, and you've got the idea for your models, but try to come up with a title for your models that would create an appropriate acronym. Okay. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just going to share them in class next week. And if you can't come up with one, we'll do it together. That's kind of the fun part of this exercise is coming up with a cool acronym together. But see, at least come up with some ideas, you know, and see what you think, you know. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We can work on it together. The second thing for next week is I'd like you to work on just a rough illustration of your model. So your model is going to be basically what is your treatment? Uh, so, you're going to include whatever theories you researched that worked. What order would you use those theories and those different therapeutic interventions? So, for example, maybe you researched, you know, uh, person-centered, which helps you build trust and identify feelings and issues. And so I always use that first. And maybe you wanted to include, family systems theory. And then maybe the third one would be something like CBT and maybe, mindfulness, you know. So that would be a nice order. And you also have to decide, okay, do you want to apply this individually? Do you want to apply it to groups? Do you want to do both? So you can see in that handout that I shared, she did a combination. So she did so many weeks, and one day in the week she did individual, and a later day in the week she did group. And I would say you could do between 6 and 12 weeks, basically. It doesn't have to be an extensive amount of time. I guess the average would be 8 weeks, 2 months. And you know, uh 12 weeks would be 3 months. So, think about the time period you want to use your model and uh, think about how you would divide the different treatments or therapeutic interventions or theories throughout those 12 weeks, or even 8 weeks. Do you want to do it with individuals, groups, or both? Um, and then, so you've got your acronym, the name of the model, you've kind of got the outline of treatment, and then think about what's going to happen each of those weeks. What's the treatment going to look like in general? So, of course, it's going to be different for every individual person, but you can have a basic idea of what happens that week. So maybe a theme for that week, or so for instance, if you're using CBT, REBT, you could go through, identifying the activating event and the belief and the consequence, and, you can move through that. So there are some standard things that you could apply to anybody who you're treating. So think about how many weeks or sessions each of those components would take. And then, you know, come up with kind of like maybe a timetable that could look like a list and a little description by each week. You'll be using this theory, and this will be the theme or intervention or technique, and that you'll focus on, that week, and might address a certain part of the client's issues. The last part for next week is, how would you present this model graphically? So, for instance, some people see treatment as a journey. So, they put the different parts of treatment on like what might look like a map or a journey to wellness. Or some people might see it as a growth model, and they might use like a tree or a flower with the different branches as you move through therapy. Some people just want to use like a flow chart with circles and squares or rectangles, and it shows the progression of the treatment. Some people use a graphic of steps, like three-dimensional steps. You can use different colors. You can use, sometimes you can use like those 3 or 4 circles that kind of merge together and overlap a little bit, and like wellness would be at the center. Because maybe it might not be linear, it might not be a straight line. Some people, like if they're treating a special population like the military, you can think of like a different graphic. The I'm thinking what else, you could base the graphic on what name you come up with, what acronym you come up with for your model. So this is a chance to be creative, and you're really just listing the steps, the progression of treatment, okay? The different treatments you'll use, the different theories, the different interventions, and you're putting it in a graphical representation. The good part of this is that it's going to take up half a page in your final paper, which, counts towards your total number of pages. So, and, you could just have kind of a rough model. And, if you can't make it to class, we should meet and talk about your model and your acronym, and we should meet and talk before you're ready to do that final paper. just to bring everything together to make sure everything's okay. Other than that, we'll meet online in class or we'll meet in class in person and go over everything. But you're coming down to the finish line with this final paper. And, you know, so next week, try to bring an acronym, try to bring kind of a graphical representation of your model, and maybe, a timeline of how you would use your model. And you don't have to bring this for next week. In your paper, you're going to describe how you would use your model in paragraph form. And that would be like maybe 1 page, 2 long paragraphs or something like that. Your description should be about a page.